We are live.
Yay!
Hello. So, hello to everybody who is joining us live, those folks who are going to be watching it after the fact. Excited. Karen and I just spent time together at one of our in person events for the mastermind that we're both in, and it was fabulous. But we are definitely feeling the after effects of the travel, plus all of the emotion that you put into it really kind of takes a little bit of time afterwards to process everything. And I feel like it's going to be a couple days, but I'm still going to be unpacking some of the great tidbits of information. And of course, one of the reasons that has that impact is because we both love listening and sharing and engaging in those conversations. And that's what makes it so tiring, but it's also what makes it so fulfilling and enlivening. So at the same time, you're getting kind of both of those.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you first. I'd love for you to tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then we're just going to chat. And folks that are listening live, if you do type comments or questions, sometimes they come over, sometimes they don't. We're not
Okay.
ignoring you. We'll catch them after the fact. All right, tell everybody about you.
Sounds great. I am Dr. Karen Molano. I am a multidimensional psychologist, and I help make parenting easy from pregnancy through the first 5 years so that both parents and their kiddos can tap into their unlimited potential. That is my goal in life.
I love it. And it's so true. And I think that as much as we get prepared for parenthood with people giving us tidbits of advice ahead of time, everybody you will talk to when you first become a parent, there's this period of like, oh, that's what that meant. Like you just really, it's very hard to kind of prepare yourself for that. And also there's kind of an insecurity that then comes in with you just want to be just good at it, right? You don't want to have to ask people for help. You want to be just good at it. And so I think one of the things that you and I can both do, you specifically with your expertise, but for all of us as parents, is to say, hey, it's really hard. We all wanted to ask somebody for help and to ask questions and to be in that position where we don't know what the best thing to do is. And while there's no one size fits all solution, engaging in conversation and talking through it with people who are a little bit on the outside of the situation as opposed to in the circumstances going with it is just it's just I think it's life changing for that relationship that you build with your child because you can enjoy it a bit more rather than dealing with kind of an unpacking all of those emotions. So one thing I was curious about before I ask you to start sharing about some of the people that you've worked with, I was kind of curious. I'm sure you, prior to parenting, were given a lot of advice, as we all are, right? And I'm sure you received a lot of great advice. But what's one of piece of advice that you received going into parenting that you found very valuable for you?
That I found valuable for me before being a parent. That is a really good question. I think it's tough because I think one of the pieces of advice that I received was to really follow your gut instinct,
Mm,
which was a great one. However, there's a caveat to that because as human beings, we often get these really great gut feelings and gut impulses, and then we doubt them. And then we
yeah.
get scared of them, and we don't know if they're right or wrong, or if they came from a good place, or if it's going to go the wrong way. So while I think that is probably the best piece of advice that I received, is also learning how to tap in and trust your gut and trust yourself into knowing, like, okay, this is coming from a place of alignment versus a place of fear or doubt.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think because I think part of even trusting our gut can be the saying, I think I need to ask somebody for help here because I don't know, right? And you use it as simple as like a fever, right? Like the
Yes.
first time your baby gets a fever, you're like, you're quickly looking in like the doctor's notes of when are you supposed to call the doctor? How long is it supposed to last? What's the amount? And it depends on what the age of the child is, what kind of thermometer you're using. And when you're in that and you're processing that, you usually will call somebody if not the doctor, and go like, "Hey, is this when I go to the doctor, or is this okay?" So part of sometimes your gut is saying, "I need to ask. I need to call a friend."
100%. Yes.
Right, right, right.
Yes.
And
And,
so
and
I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, and sometimes it's even the opposite, where I've been in a place where I've been to the doctor and I'm told something, and it's like, no, you can't, this can't be. And it's like, but there's got to be another way.
Mm.
And so also trusting that curiosity to seek for more. And that's where parenting, I think, is really tricky, because we are told, like, okay, go have a baby, you'll figure it out. Like, oh my goodness, it is a shock to the system. And no matter how much I've been doing this in my life, when my little one, who's now 10, was born, those first few weeks was a literal shock. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel so incompetent, and I'm supposed to know what to do. And so you get advice coming from a million directions. You don't know which one to listen to. You don't know what's what anymore. And that's where I think where it's a big, huge gap in our system, is that we prepare for everything, everything. But preparedness for parenting is like, oh, I took, how to put on the diapers or how to breastfeed or that kind of a thing. It's a lot more comprehensive than that. And I think in the long run, we could be in such a better place if we actually had some guidance or a roadmap or that manual that we talk about that we don't come with. It would definitely
Right.
make life more helpful.
Well, and two is there's some great resource. I mean, there's some books out there that probably shouldn't be out there, but there's also a lot of really great books out there. But you could pick up 5 different books and they're going to give you 5 different strategies, and those 5 strategies could probably all be beneficial to someone. But there's no book that's going to be out there that's going to say what it's like for you on this date with your kid under this specific circumstance. And so that's why the approach that you take isn't just about saying, hey, here's just a complete strategy, but it's also understanding, like, how do you know what's going to work in your situation? How many kids are in your household? Is this your first kid? Is this your second kid? What is your household situation like in terms of who's the primary caregiver during the day? Is your child in daycare? So there's those factors really have to be considered, and if you skip out on them and you just read the book and you try to apply that, you're going to become very frustrated when it doesn't work for you. And I remember somebody telling me about, I don't remember the book, and I don't know that I would mention it anyway because I don't want to necessarily say that the book was at fault, but it was some sleep strategy, right? And I was exhausted. And as it turned out, there ended up being other medical things that were going on with my child that I didn't recognize were contributing to some of the problems, but it was a sleep strategy. And so, the book made it sound so easy, like you do this at this time and you do this at this time. And from a project management perspective, I'm like, okay, like step 1, step 2, step 3, if this is your next thing. But it wasn't working. And I think I would have been better off never having read the book, never having tried that strategy, and just been having difficulty, because then I started to think, like, why is this solution that works for so many people not working for me? Like, what am I doing wrong?
Mhm.
Nothing. It was just a different situation. And so what is maybe the way that you, when you're meeting with a parent, I know that you do a variety of different things, right? It's not like one specific thing you do.
Right.
I'd love in a minute for us to talk about the massage stuff because I think that's super cool. But let's say you're meeting with a parent for the first time. What is kind of some of the ways, the initial conversation that you have to understand where they're coming from, or even maybe tips that you could give others to say, like, okay, here's where we're going to start. Like, here's step 1. You're in this place, something feels wrong. What's step 1?
Absolutely. So I created a method that has 8 dimensions of health. And so in my assessment phase, I look at all those 8 dimensions of health, because we often associate a psychologist with more of that socio-emotional development,
Mm,
feelings, that kind of a thing. But I bring something more to the table, where I bring Eastern medicine and functional medicine. Now we look at so many more things. We look at your surroundings, the nutrition, the toxins you're exposed to, all of these little hidden things that a lot of people don't know about, that can impact your mental health, that impact your mood, whether a child has tantrums, whether you as a parent are having a hard time.
mm,
And so I bring all of those to the table, but I always start with the mindset of the parent. I think that is the most important, and it's something that throughout the entire time, that holding the hand and helping people find what aligns with them is something that we keep working on. Myself as an individual, is something I do every
right.
single day, intentionally and consciously, because I can give you a book of all the best tips in the world, all the strategies, all the things. And if you're not in a place where you're in alignment or understand when you're not, they're not often not going to work. So what I've noticed
Mm,
is that when a lot of parents come to me and say, I've tried A and B and C and it doesn't work, there's a lot more underneath it. There's a lot of belief systems. things we believe about ourselves as parents, things we believe about our kids. And if we don't get underneath and really dig those up and find a way to shift the energy, or at least understand them and give them a voice, then all the other things are a lot more difficult. Not impossible. It just feels a lot
Right.
harder. So,
Yeah, I mean that's powerful. I mean, and really parenting does put your self-awareness under the magnifying glass, right? You find yourself analyzing yourself a lot because in a bunch of different ways. Number one, you respond to things. You're exhausted sometimes, right? You're just exhausted. You're processing through it. So you mess up, and messing up might mean you raised your voice or you said a comment that you wish you hadn't said. And so then you start like, why did I do that? And then you start to think back to things you did to your parents and like, oh my gosh, I remember saying that. I remember how they. So there's so many levels to what happens when you become a parent and the way that we process that, and the sheer responsibility of I'm raising this being that's going to grow up and interact with with society, and I need to prepare them both for what they're going to receive and how they're going to give of themselves.
mhm.
That's a lot.
A lot.
So yeah, it's a lot. And so that's, I think I love that you have, and I'm going to have you talk a little bit more about those 8 components of health, maybe just give like what each of those components
Sure.
is, because I think it's important in that any one specific thing. So like if we reference like the sleep thing, just because you get sleep solved doesn't mean like now everything else is going to completely sort itself out. There's other pieces to it. And when you've got that whole toolbox as a parent that you know that you can pull from, and it gives you that confidence, and by hearing from somebody professional that there are all these things to consider, when you hit one of those spots where you're feeling overwhelmed, you're like, wait a minute, do you go by Dr. Karen with parents? How do you?
I get all sorts of difference. I
Oh,
get
okay.
Dr. K, Dr. Karen, Dr.
Okay.
Milano. Yeah.
Because I just call you Karen, so I was like, oh,
No,
I don't know how a parent would
whatever
refer to
you
you, but
feel comfortable with.
but let's say, so somebody remembers that you had that discussion with them. It automatically provides validity. And when you feel the validity, it removes some of that self-doubt. You're like, okay, this is what we knew could be potential. Can you talk about those 8? It's because it's a cool approach, the way that you take it. Like you said, it's not just about this one modality, it's about the whole picture.
Right, absolutely. And I just wanted to piggyback on what you said too, about us as parents feeling like things have to be perfect. And if we didn't do the one thing, oh my goodness, did we screw up our kids? And I think
Right.
just to remember that you are perfect as you are. There is nothing wrong with you ever, or your kids. It's a matter of, okay, this is just a learning opportunity. Something happened. It's just data, it's a message. And what kids will always remember is not the breakdown or what went wrong. They'll remember when later on, when you're feeling in alignment and they're calmed down, they'll remember the repair. They'll remember we came
Right.
together and figured this out. So I think I just wanted to point that out because I think that's
I
something that
love
comes
it.
up
Yeah, that's
quite a
beautiful.
bit,
That's beautiful.
and that we're so hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
So my 8 dimensions, one of them is mindset and spirituality. So really looking at what we were raised with, the beliefs that we have within ourselves, and how can we start to let go of those beliefs that no longer serve us, so that we're more intentional in our parenting. So mindset, not just for the parent, but then the mindset that we instill in our children. So I go through a whole section of that. The second modality is really understanding brain development in a child 5 and under, because it is so different what we expect children to do and what they actually can do. So really understanding how the brain develops and everything that goes on in the programming of the subconscious and of the brain in those first 5 years is just mind blowing. So really learning and understanding, so that when you're interacting with your kids, now having some insights like, oh, wait, I'm making an ask that they can't even meet. So then that's going to
Mm.
really reduce a lot of the frustration on both ends. And then we go into social emotional development. And that's really more of where people associate psychologists with, is really understanding all the developmental stages. Are they on track? What to expect? Toileting, sleep, all the things you
Right.
can think of. We look at those, but we look at them from a perspective of your family life and where you're at. So for me, it's more of a lifestyle, not a prescription of a strategy or
Sure.
anything. It's like, let's implement a lifestyle that makes sense for where you're at and your children are at. Then we look at cognitive development and learning, so that we can help parents prepare their kiddos in a way where learning is easy and fun and enjoyable. And it's about curiosity, because getting them ready for school really happens in those first 5 years. So once you go to school to learn, they've already passed a lot of critical stages of development where there's these critical learning periods that may have already been missed by the time they get to school. So we take a look at that. And then we look at nutrition and gut health, because that's something that's often overlooked, and how we can really feed the brain in a way that it provides the support. So, example, if a child's having a meltdown, right, we think it's all about the words and what's going on, but we often don't even realize that that child could be lacking the neurotransmitter GABA, which is what helps us to calm down. So, if the child isn't getting the types of nutrients that are going to help the gut create the GABA, then it's going to be more difficult for that child to calm down. So we look at nutrition and gut health and how we can, right from the beginning, instill a lifestyle that's really going to optimize the brain and the body, because it sure is. I think we all know it's much easier, like right from the beginning, than it is to do it much later on. So an example is, I hear quite a bit that kids are picky eaters, right? And that it can be very tough to get them to eat certain foods. But what we often don't hear is that the microbiome and the diversity of it, there's, if they have more of these bugs that crave the pizzas and the pastas and the carbs and the foods that are heavy, they know how to get that child to eat those, to want them. And so
Mm.
when we can help the gut and really help diversify the gut bugs that help us, they are going to naturally ask for more of the vegetables and the foods that are healthier. But we don't have a conversation around that very often. We're like, why aren't you eating? Really, it's more like, it's almost like you should have a discussion with their gut friends and not so much the kid themselves. So we look at that. We look at movement and exercise, because that is a very, very crucial part of helping a child maintain emotional regulation and stability. And I mean, I don't think I need to go into the benefits of
Yeah.
exercise,
Yeah.
but it's even more so important when it comes to kids and the parents, of just throughout the day, of like, how can we maintain this, the body regulated, because the body's meant to move. And we often see parents and ourselves sitting, right? And we're supposed to sit still and we can't move. And so we're having dinner, and I see it all the time. And we do it naturally. I don't think that, it's not a time to blame. It's more
Right.
awareness
Right.
that a lot of parents will be like, sit still, don't move when they're eating. It's like, it's not hurting anybody if they're, doing the rocking or moving. This is actually good. This is what their bodies are asking
Right.
for. They're asking for that energy to shift. And so how can we implement movement and exercise in a way that's really going to support the body and brain? And then we look at the environment. So think about not just the environment as in the surroundings, even the way the room is set up, how that can support the brain. And some kids could have meltdowns just based on the way their room's set up and the colors and all the things that are going on in there. So we get down to those details. We look at the type of toxins that kiddos and families are being exposed to, and how to really incorporate nature as a way to help regulate the system. And then stress, because stress is a big one. Stress is one that we all experience, no matter whether we're 1 day old or 100 years
Right.
old. And so really learning what stress looks like within you, within your family, and learning ways to manage it and cope. So we bring all of those dimensions together and instill and create a lifestyle that makes sense to the family. I always like to think of it as going into a buffet. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff, because I definitely have a lot, but it's not about how do I get all this in. It's more what aligns with me. So I go into a buffet,
Mm.
oh, that looks good. I'm going to try this out. I'm going to taste it. Oh, wait, no, I'm not quite ready to eat that yet. And so then, in a very sustainable way and in a very natural way, we implement a lifestyle that really supports the family and just gets them going. And now the kids grow up completely different. And in that process, we are intentionally wiring the brain. We're intentionally building the architecture of the brain and supporting the body, so that now kids and their parents can start to learn how to tap into this unlimited potential that every single human being has. We just don't know how to tap into it. That was a lot, but
I love it. No, I love it. The only reason it was, I'm like, I wanted to take notes because I'm like, oh, that's really good. But I didn't want to, like, I also was like, leaning in to hear what you're saying. And one of the things that right off the bat strikes me that I kind of want to note is and I think this can be positive and negative, and what you're doing is making it positive. Is we do see a mirror image when we're working with our children. We start to get that a lot of things back at us. And I mean, you're teaching all those things. Those are good things for all of us, right? I mean, you think about us as an adult, there's times where because we have not been taking the appropriate vitamins, getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, that would be me. I completely am going to flag like this past week. I burned myself out. And I'm like, of course I don't feel good because I'm not getting enough sleep and I'm not drinking enough water. I'm working, 16-hour days. Your body can't sustain that. So when you're guiding parents through the act of helping them to coach kids in, let's rework your gut so that you're craving the correct foods. I mean, that's helpful for all of us. We all have issues with grabbing what the initial, salty, sweet, whatever it is that we think that we need, but it's really just those stress cravings kicking in.
Mhm.
Within are there things that you find you refine because you've got a whole host of education, experience, et cetera, both doing what you're doing and from training, et cetera. But like, are there things that you see as a parent that you're like, oh, that's helpful, like that you're learning on a regular basis or maybe every so often that you then bring back to your program and go, I'm gonna add that?
Every day, every day. I
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever a time where we can start. I don't claim to know everything, and a
Mm,
lot of times too, when I am, coaching a parent or working with a parent or with a child, because I do both, right?
right.
Um, Sometimes I'm telling them or helping them break through something, and I'm even taking notes for myself. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this totally applies to me." Or one, right?
I do the same thing. You like say it and you're
Like,
like, wait,
huh,
I never said it like that
okay.
before.
Right? So that's one. And second, I just think there's just so much out there, so much goodness, so much expertise. Even, talking about this mastermind that we went to, I love it is a passion of mine to meet other people with other
Hmm.
areas of expertise because now you can bridge things together. Now you can bring in other experts to deep dive. So I always feel like, okay, I can catch you. I have a net. But whenever there's something that needs more in-depth work, I know who to connect you to. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a very important part of any treatment, or not, let's not even call it treatment, just life in general, is
Right.
that everything to me is very connected. We're everything symbiotic, very interconnected, and we have a tendency to separate things out. And so when we can bring everything together, it just flows so much more beautifully. So to be able to say, okay, I see that this is going on with you, and I know exactly who we can pull in to give you additional support, or at least that I can reach out and get additional support from, because I don't claim to know everything. I don't think, I mean, do
Mm,
any of us know everything? There's just so much.
right.
And so to
Right.
keep learning, to me, what's important is, even as I'm working with families and I see new things like, "Ooh, I had not seen that before. Maybe there's an alternative to that, or something isn't working." I love to be curious, and I love families, being curious. Even if you don't want to listen to me, like, please be curious about what
Right.
I have to say. Don't
Right.
take it for granted, because if there's something that's telling you otherwise, let's look into that. There's messages there, and maybe there's another way to do things that we haven't even thought about or looked at. And so I think it's really important to bring in novelty and innovation and continue to learn and see what's working, because we're different people every single day. And what might have
Yeah.
worked 10 days ago maybe now has shifted because we've shifted. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, the landscape's changing too, right? It's there are some core principles to parenting and things that apply across the generations, and it doesn't matter. But there's certainly some different things. I mean, we joke around. My generation jokes around about on Facebook, like, remember when you used to be out on your bike until the lights were flat. And so that's not the case anymore. So some of the strategies that your parents might be inclined to kind of or your grandparents or whomever, right, depending on age. I have three teenagers, and so it's like some of the strategies that my parents would have suggested. I'm like, that doesn't apply to now because it's different.
Mhm.
You would call a friend, and if the friend wasn't home, you left a message with their answering machine or whomever, and you waited for the person to call back, and you didn't know when they got home. Now,
Right.
like, the message is on red. And like, my friend didn't call me back, and I know they know I called because I can see that they just. So there's a different type of processing that takes place. That's for teenagers, but I think even for younger, while I mean, some parents are letting their children use tablets, no criticism, right? Younger ages. So there are a lot of little kids who are playing games and doing stuff. But even off the tablet, we are definitely living in a society that has very screens everywhere. They're existing in your environment and stuff. So it is trying to help them. You don't want to make that the enemy. You want to help them learn how to navigate
Absolutely.
through that and make discerning choices because you're
Yeah.
not going to avoid that.
And I think,
You were leaning forward. You had a good response. I could
well, I was
tell.
gonna say, I think that that's a big part of it. It's like, I don't claim to make anything the enemy. It's more like, let's have knowledge, let's
Right.
have understanding, and then we can make choices from a place of alignment. It's like, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing, and maybe in a way that makes more sense to you. An example: last night, my son was having a stomach ache. We eat fairly healthy. It's not perfect, and there's times when he wants to eat certain things, and he knows that his body isn't going to respond well to them. But he knows enough now where he was so hungry and we were at Costco. And so, when you walk outside of Costco, there's pizza and hot dogs. And I'm like, oh, not my favorite. And as a parent, I want to say, nope, absolutely not. You can't do it. He's like, Mommy, I am like really hungry. I don't know if I can make it home. And I'm like, well, baby, you have a stomach ache. I'm going to let you figure it out. You ask your body, what does your body need right now? He's like, you know what? I think I'm going to eat the pizza right now and see how it goes. And okay, let's just see what happens. I'm really hungry. And I'm in the back of my head, I'm going, this isn't going to go well. He's going to hurt his stomach because he doesn't do well with pizza. I'm like, but you know what? It's for him to figure out and for him to also learn and trust his own body, because I could just tell him, don't eat it. And then he's just going to get mad and resentful at me, but he's not going to really understand how that feels for him. And so I'm like, okay. So he starts to eat it within a couple minutes. He's like, nope. You know what? Nope, I don't want it. I don't want it. And I could say, see, I told you so. That's not going to help. I'm like, okay, so your body doesn't want it. Okay, what do you want instead? He's like, you know what? I really want something healthy. And he actually jumped into the cart and pulled up some, like, I don't know, whatever vegetables I had in there and started eating. I was like, I think my body really is asking for veggies right now. I'm like, okay, I didn't do anything. He figured it out on his own and
Right.
very quickly. But what I did do was, over the years, set the foundation to allow him to understand, to introspect, and to really be able to make more aligned decisions. And he makes really good ones. And so it's this balance and in understanding and navigating and learning every day, because it's not something that I claim like, oh yeah, become a perfect parent in 10 weeks. Absolutely not. I actually like to walk people through those pregnancy and those first 5 years, because it's different every stage and it changes so incredibly fast. So fast. Like year one is
Right.
so different from year two, and from year three, it's like,
Yeah.
wait, what? I thought I mastered that.
Yeah.
And boom, you get all this
Yep.
regression in this. And so really having the knowledge so that then you can have the insight and introspection to make whatever changes within you and implement what makes sense.
And it is scary too, right? Like when you give your kid that freedom, because there's a fine line you walk, right? You educate, and then you got to find the places where you could safely,
Mhm.
right? Like you wouldn't let a 2-year-old go figure out that you don't cross the road, right? Like
Correct.
there's so it, but there that's an extreme, but there's all those gray areas where you're like, is this one of those? And that doesn't change. I mean, I don't know if it ever changes. I mean, I feel like my mom has since passed away, but there are still times when I'll even ask my dad's advice, right? Like as a parent, your child's asking you a question and you're like, is this one where I got to be like, you got to go with your gut on this? Or is this one where I'd be like, here's my suggestion? And I will say, even with my teenager, and obviously this is a teenager, so the strategy is going to be a little bit different when they're younger. But one of the things I notice is she'll come to me and she'll, vent about something that happened or express her emotion. And sometimes it feels really big to her, sometimes it's something minor, but either way, there are times when she's coming to me because she wants some advice, and there are times when she's just coming to me because she wants my ear and some love. And so in my good intention, I would hear something and think of like a suggestion or a solution, and so she would finish, and she would get upset either because it didn't align with what her thought was. And so I started asking her. So now when she comes to me with something, I'll say, is this advice or just listen? And it has changed things. And if I do have a thought, I'll say, I have a thought. Do you want to hear it? So I
Mhm.
think like now that's a teenager. So obviously a 5-year-old may not necessarily be able to always cognitively determine when they should and shouldn't take advice. But when we establish with them that they are very much going to become independent individuals, right? They, even though they are our child, they are their own being. So we need to help them to figure out, how do you weigh the positives and the negatives, right? Like, you let him take that bite of pizza, I guarantee the next time he's got an upset stomach, he's going to think like, pizza's probably not the choice.
Mhm.
So it's navigating that. Now, how do you kind of help, because in that, like you said, pregnancy to 5-year-old, it's a lot of that development. How do you help parents with that, understanding that when they can make the decision to let their child make the decision as opposed to making the decision themselves, outside of the extremes?
Of course, and then that's a twofold, because there is a learning how to read your own gut emotions and that impulse, and to how do I determine if what I'm feeling is coming from a place of fear or it's coming from a good space, right? Because oftentimes we'll pass on our own fears and our own traumas to our kids because we don't know any better. That's what we do. So part of it is really learning to discern the difference. And that's a process, is really learning,
Mm,
okay, how do I learn to listen to myself and what I'm hearing myself every time I want to guide my child? One. Two is that while children that are little may not have the words to speak, they have a language. They speak very beautifully, and it's very nonverbal language. It's in so many little cues and things that they do. And when we can actually learn that language, and we often do it very instinctually, but when you actually learn it and you can intentionally see it, it's like, oh, there's always cues and there's always things that are going on before a child breaks down, before things
mm.
feel like they go wrong. And to be able to learn how to read that language is incredibly helpful. And so bringing those two together, so it's almost like a dance, because there is no perfect way to do it. But if you have this foundation of like, okay, how do we do this symbiotically? And how do we do this in this beautiful dance, and allowing a child to lead you and not thinking that you have all the answers? Because oftentimes as parents, we think we have all the answers and we know exactly what a child needs. And like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. And it turns out that they actually have them. And we just have to
Mm.
allow, and we have to let them come through and show the what's best for them, because oftentimes they know, and what we think is best isn't necessarily the best. And so it's definitely a process of learning different things and modalities to understand and develop those skills, and it's over time, obviously, um but that's one of the first things I do, is like, let's look at, I always think of the client as the relationship, not the child, not the parent. It's the relationship and what's going on in that relationship, and what is working well. And even, we may be trying certain things. Let's try this. What's blocking it? What's keeping it from working? And sometimes it doesn't, and finding alternatives and things that make sense for the family, because I really think it's about meeting a family where they're at and going from that space at whatever pace needs to happen for them.
Yeah, absolutely. To speak to that specific point you just made, right? Because if you don't meet somebody where they're at, and you create these somewhat arbitrary, they're not totally arbitrary, but they're arbitrary in the sense that they're not customized to the situation, then you run the risk of them feeling just additional frustration because they're not hitting these goals, right? Okay, by next week, your child is going to be eating 3 balanced meals. Well, when that doesn't happen, so it's the incremental steps along the way that are really, really powerful. And I think also, just like, so I do when I'm doing consulting and coaching stuff, I do a lot of teaching people to get comfortable saying, I don't know, right? Like, you can say it as a leader, you can say it. And so I think as a parent now, again, knowing the age of your child and the circumstances, but with, like, for example, a 5-year-old, if they ask a question and you're not certain, you don't have to say, we're not going to talk about this, or just give a quick thing. You can say, mommy or daddy isn't sure. Let me think about what that would be the best solution right there. That's not going to puncture your child's image of you or make them feel less secure because you said, I don't know. So that means you're not, the be all and end all, and you can't protect them. I think that children, once they have that cognitive ability to communicate, they can understand, let me think about this. Like, give
Mhm.
me a minute to think about this. And so I think what you're doing is giving parents the freedom and confidence to lean into that, thinking things through, and that doesn't reflect that they haven't learned. Like, right? Like,
No.
okay, like you said, every day, every week, every year is different. That's a really profound thing. And I imagine too, it also has to do with, right, if there's a health condition or some type of disability that somebody's experiencing.
Of
And
course.
with situations like that, because I'm wondering, like I know, so my oldest was born with brain damage, and he has a host of issues that kind of go along with that, including cognitive delays. He has allergies that may or may not be related, and I
Mhm.
certainly noticed, correlation between certain foods that he would eat and behavior. However, at 18, he may or may not agree with some of those suggestions. So he does make his own choices. So I think that's why it's really important. I didn't know as much as I think I should have would have been helpful if I had known more when
Mhm.
he was younger. Right? Like now looking back, I'm like, if I had known that, I could have helped to establish this habit. Not that I still can't, but at 18, there tends to be a
It
whole other,
definitely just takes a longer time. That's really all
yeah,
it
so
is.
different thing.
It's more difficult to break habits and I mean, we're all trying to break some sort of habit. I don't know
Right.
anybody who isn't. So it's
Well,
so much
yeah, and
easier
right.
right from the start.
Well, and I think so talking about that, because you're talking about like a 5-year-old, and I'm sure that again, so now you've got children that are coming to you that may have additional needs that have to be met or different ways that they have to be approached, right? They may, if they're allergic to something, well, obviously that's not an option or something they can eat. So do you have like in those situations, do parents tend to bring you like, here's the medical record so you can kind of understand it? Is it more of a, you're asking questions and answers? Like I imagine that's a different process altogether. How do you navigate through some of those circumstances?
Sure. I have a tendency to do a pretty thorough, just right in the beginning, just
Okay.
an assessment of the lifestyle, the family's lifestyle, and what they're doing and what's going on. And absolutely, if they've been seen by other medical providers, if they've been seen by other mental health providers, whatever occupational therapy, speech therapy, you name it, I deep dive into
Right.
what's already been happening. And then we also implement new measures and assessments, like very objective measures. So we do, for example, I incorporate a sensory profile so we can see other things that maybe we're not aware of. Like, for example, the kids that have a hard time with tags on their clothes, or the way things feel, or the way touch or light or loud sounds, which oftentimes interferes with their functioning or everyday
Right.
behavior that we're not really looking at, or just developmental milestones to make sure that they're meeting them. And so I do a pretty thorough assessment
Sure.
in the beginning of just the lifestyle in general, so we can start to look at the root cause of things, as opposed to, oh, let's just compartmentalize and put it in this little box and it must be this. I'm like, well, let's look at everything. Let's do
Right.
like a whole assessment of all the things that are going on, so that we can again bring in those dimensions and look at all of them and pull from each one to see what makes sense for that family. And typically when we do that, the results are a lot faster than more of your traditional treatment that doesn't look at some of these other things.
Yeah. And you've got to develop the relationship too, which is because you have that demeanor about you. I think there's definitely sometimes a reluctance. Like no parent wants to be like, well, we get McDonald's 3 times a week and the kids watch 4 hours of TV every morning, right? Like because in some circumstances it's a like this is what I need in order to be able to make it through the day. If you're,
Yeah.
so that's the ways this types of adaptations that you've incorporated. And so, you're not there to judge. You're there to hear
No,
where they're at to try to
absolutely
figure out
not.
what is the navigation forward. And so there does become some of that. I think that's for anybody that's watching this now or after the fact. That's one takeaway that I would hope that when working with you or with somebody who's in a similar type of role, the importance of being open and honest in order to get to where you're in your head, where you're wanting to be. You can only get there if you're open and honest and share those things. So
Right. Exactly. And the reminder, and I'll say it over and over, is that you're not doing anything wrong. You are
right,
perfect as you are. You're always going to be. It's just we're collecting data and figuring out what makes sense. Like, you got to do like one simple thing I
right,
do with families that do actually want to incorporate, let's say, the nutritional aspects, because they want to see results faster. Because again, it's always going to be up to them. It's always a volunteered thing. It's like, okay, if you're having pasta, example, let's just add a little bit of chicken to it, or let's change it from vegetable oil to olive oil.
right.
Things that people don't even notice, or the kids don't even notice, because it would it's also really hard on a child to go from A to B. It's always, it has
Right.
to be gradual. And so I like to say that I like to give you the knowledge and then bring it down to the introspection of like, okay, what feels good, what doesn't, what beliefs are here that are blocking. Let's shift the energy around there and then you implement. So it's not like
Mm,
all of a sudden process of boom. Like, no, let's slow down for a minute here, because I see we live in a world where everything's very quick. We want quick, quick,
right.
quick. And things
Right.
can be quick. But the question too is, even with, for example, sleep training or potty training that I see all the time, like, yeah, you can potty train your child in a day. Great. If your goal is to just, not have to deal with the dirty diapers, but what does that look like 10 years from now? How is that
Right.
impacting your child in other ways that you may not be thinking about? Because when we actually slow down a little bit and do things where it makes sense for both the child and the parent, and we're doing it like, oh yeah, I'm doing this because it's the child's ready versus I need us to be this way, it's going to look
Right.
very different in terms of confidence, in terms of other beliefs that can form when we're trying to make things faster. Because I get it, we're overwhelmed, but it's a process where we don't have to be so overwhelmed when we actually have a roadmap.
Right. And the process and the incremental and changes and those changes being fit into where your current circumstances are. So in like that example, maybe, maybe that's dinner because for financial reasons, right? Maybe you're doing that as dinner for financial reasons. Maybe you're doing that for dinner because you've got limited time. There's a whole bunch of reasons that could feed into it. So you're not coming at it and saying, well, this is wrong and this is wrong, because you're right. Nobody's wrong. Everybody's figuring out what is going to be the best that they can do in the circumstances that they're in. And so you're about optimizing and maximizing the impact and relationship that can be had in those circumstances. Where can the little changes be made that may be helpful so that you don't feel like you have to uproot everything that's currently working for you in order to fix the things that aren't working for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. But there is a lot of change, and I mean change is part of it, and we do need to be open to that, and we need to be open to saying this is something that's going to benefit the long haul of everybody, those
Mhm.
relationships.
Mhm.
Ultimately, what made you, I'm just curious, I know that we're over 40 minutes here, but what made you interested in this? I'm kind of curious, like, were you always, was this one of those things where when you were younger, you were like, this is what I want to do? Was there something that over time you realized, like, this is my skill set?
So I knew when I was maybe 5 years old, I wanted to be a doctor of some sort. I didn't know what kind. I just knew I wanted to be a doctor. Okay, sure. When I started college, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I took a couple classes in psychology, and I fell in love. And I've always loved kids, so something I did even early in college, where I started working with kids on the side, whether it was tutoring or whatever it was. I love little ones. They're the best. And over time, my own trials and tribulations, I went through infertility, and I wanted so much to be a mom, and that killed me in so many ways. I've been through mold toxicity where my health was really compromised. I ended up with really severe depression, to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. I'm like, that was from a toxin in my brain. I'm like, I am like one of the happiest beings. How is this even possible? Divorce. There's just been so many things. And every time I have one of these big things happen, I'm very curious. Like, there's got to be a way to overcome this. And so, in that process, into really finding more about myself, more about the authentic me that I want to be, I also turned to Eastern medicine quite a bit. And when I applied it to myself, it felt like a magic potion. Sometimes I'm like, what is this sorcery? It's working so well. And so I started to become curious and learn more about it. And as I learned more and implemented it first to myself and saw such incredible changes, I just wondered, why didn't I learn this? Why didn't I learn this in school? How come nobody taught me about these things? Because they do directly affect our brain health, our mental health. And so then I started going out and learning more and more. And so I've spent probably the last, out of my 20 years working with kiddos, the last 10 have been more geared towards learning about alternative methods of healing and really the whole body and more of a holistic method. And so then I just started to do that with my own kid and then my clients. And I'm like, wait a minute. And then I started to realize, why don't we go back to the beginning? Because we're constantly trying to shift something about ourselves. You always have these doubts and fears and beliefs that kick in, and those are formed in the first 5 years. So, what if we intentionally did it, intentionally wired the brain? And so, our kids, as they grow up, have not that they are not going to have any adversity, because they will. Life is life, but it's just the way you cope with it and the way you see it, the way you perceive it is incredibly different. And I already see it in the clients that I work with, in my son. It's so different. If I knew now at the age of 5, at the age of 7, at the age of 10, oh my goodness, life would be a lot easier. And so I want for parents to believe that parenting doesn't have to be so darn hard, that we can change the story around it. It's just that we've been thrown at it and we've been expected
Mm,
to figure it out. There's not a whole lot out there that looks at those really early years. It's kind of like, yeah, here you go, good luck, and read the book and have a couple consultations here and there. But we do. To me, even parenting, you can even think of it, in the business world. Aren't we constantly training and learning? Oh, we have a new software rolling out, and you're preparing for it for months and finding the bugs, and let's report the bugs, and let's try this, and here's who you can go to for help. But then you bring a kid home and you're like, yeah, you can phone a friend. Here's your life.
right, right.
Go see your pediatrician once for 10 minutes. And, it's tough, and it doesn't have to be. I just think we live in a world where we decided and we've subscribed to the idea that parenting is supposed to be hard, therefore it is. And why do anything different? This is how it's supposed to be. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose for it to
Yeah.
be different.
Yeah, and proactive, I feel like proactive mental health, or however we would want to kind of frame it, but I feel like that should be part of checkups. I know that when you go to your pediatrician appointment, they do ask some basic questions about your child's mental well-being. But I just think that learning how to talk and communicate those types of things for both the parent and the child, those types of check-ins on a regular basis, not because there's a problem, but because we want to,
Yes.
like you said, maximize and optimize. I mean, yes, sometimes people are coming to you because they're encountering an issue and they're like, can you please help us write this path that we're on? So that's certainly a part of it. But what I see when you're talking about it in your posts and in some of your media coverage, right? You're talking about, like, let's just do this. Like, this
Mhm.
isn't about you can't do it. This isn't about you messed something up. This isn't about. It's just like, let's do this, because this is going to make it easier, and you're gonna feel better about it, and you're gonna enjoy it.
Mhm.
You going to the grocery store, you should be able to focus on the people pointing out your cute kid, not the, like, oh my gosh, are they going to throw a tantrum and what is that going to mean? And I think it's not going to prevent all of those challenges, but it's going to equip us with the emotional resilience and the foresight to know that when they come, we have ways that we can address them. And it doesn't mean that
Yep.
something has broken. It's just
Correct.
part, right. It's
And
just,
I
you got to, right. Go ahead.
and I was saying, and then those teen years, they're going to be a lot
Mm,
easier, a lot,
yeah.
when you
Yeah.
actually focus on those 5 years. And then the adult years, those are going to be a lot easier. And then I think of like chronic health, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all of those things. I really genuinely believe they can be prevented when we start right.
Mm,
When we look at
because we're
something
not getting so
we don't look
stressed.
at. A lot of
Yeah.
the things we're
Yeah.
exposed to, the food, the toxins, so many, the stress, and the way we think about ourselves, even the way we think about ourselves alone is making us sick. And so when we start right from the beginning, we are looking at a lifetime that's going to be a lot easier and a lot more smooth. And we all deserve, everybody is so incredibly worthy and deserves to have a great life.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
finally at that tipping point where we're starting to see that that is a possibility. Everybody
Yeah.
can be extraordinary. It shouldn't be an outlier.
Right. Absolutely. You're born that way. You're born
Yes,
amazing. You
yes,
just got to live in it. Live into it.
yes.
All right. So, first thing is, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way? Or it could be something, a program that you're going, or just in general. What
Sure.
is a way for people to connect with you and get, your tips? So,
My company name is Lumitot, Lumitot, comes from the word illuminated and little ones, so Lumitot. I'm all over socials with Lumitot, at Lumitot, pretty much all socials. I also have a guide that can be easily implemented just with those 8 dimensions of health, so you can start to become curious about them, and has some quick tips and things that you can do. And that one is gift.lumitot.com. Super simple. So that's another place where people can get that guide. And it also has information as to how to get in touch with me. I'm happy to jump on a call, and then that's linked to a calendar too. So that's another way to do it. Or just my website, just lumitot.com. I try to make
Yeah,
it
you're
simple.
Yeah, I mean, well, the great thing about your website is you go there and it's got the links to all your social media and all the different things. Because we didn't even talk about the massage, which is a whole
Oh
other
my
really
gosh,
cool
that's
thing that you
right.
do. So people will have to go on there or they'll follow up with you to find out more about that. Because I did infant massage with my daughter, and it was
Oh,
just it was good
that's,
for her with her reflux. It was bonding for
yeah.
me. It was like that special time. So I think that there's a lot of benefits to that. Last tip that you want to give whomever is watching this live or who's watching this after the fact on any, okay, broad. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just a parting tip or something that you want to say to everybody.
Yes,
Message.
I'm gonna stick with the theme that we had today, as when you're feeling that guilt that I did something wrong, I'm not doing something right, or I'm not good enough, or just remember that you are, that
Mm,
anything that you do or say can always be repaired. And it's in the repair that you and your child are going to remember what happened. They're not going to remember the argument or whatever didn't work. It's the repair process.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you very much for taking time to meet with us today. Thank you.
Thank
Anybody
you.
that's, yeah, that watched this, I'm hoping, I always love this. I say this a lot, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's just a cool thing that I guarantee you with every one of these go lives, right? That at least one person hears something that they're going to apply. I'm sure it's more than that, but I always know that. So I'm always consciously aware that there's a person right now or subsequent to the recording, if they're looking at the recording, I should say, who's going to be impacted by it. And I just think that that's powerful. That's one of the incredible platforms that social media provides for us to be able to reach out to people we wouldn't otherwise meet, and helps people to do what you just said, which is just to hear that message that they're amazing. So I really appreciate you telling people that in the way that you did with the words that you did. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you. And thank you for having me here today. I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful that you're doing these. I watch them as much as I can, and they're always packed with so much value. I'm like, yes,
Thank you.
this is wonderful. Thank you for doing
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. Take care, everybody.